All right. So we are going to write a point class. Very, just piece by piece. We're going to start out pretty basic. Okay. And we're going to use that to write our bomb program. So, this is going on YouTube, so this is hopefully won't get me onto a FBI watch list or something. But anyway, so our bomb program for just turning things red. So each point will contain an XY data it will have fields, which are basically the data that describes the point, and data that describes the point is what? It's where it's located. So it's XY coordinate. It's going to have its fields, and then it's going to have a bunch of things that we can do with points, like calculate the distance from one point to another, or move this point to another point. Those are called methods. So we'd love to use points like this, right? Point P1 is equal to a new point, 5, -2, which will create a new point that's located at 5 and -2. Or we can just create it like this, where we have a new point at 0, 0, because it's at the origin. So it's going to have an x and y coordinate, and then it's going to have, then we'll say points can do these things. They can set their location, they can move, translate, so they'll adjust by some delta x and some delta y. You can calculate the distance to another point, and then we can tell it how to draw itself on a drawing panel. So we can use this this point class as a blueprint for building point objects, individual points, right? We can have a point that's at 5, -2, or -245 and 1897, or one at 18 and 42. So this class describes how to build them. Each object has its own copy of its own individual x coordinate, its own individual y coordinate. So let's go ahead and start by writing a point object. So let's go over here to, so what you want to do is like create a new class in whatever you're using in the same package, right? And you'll want to give it the name point, right? Okay, so we want to give it some, so it needs fields. So points have an x and a y coordinate, and creating basically an x and a y coordinate are pretty simple. At the top of any object, right? So at the top of any class, rather, we just list the fields. So notice that we say public class point, right? Just like any other program, right? Here I said public class bomb. This says I'm creating a point object. Sorry, point class. I'm creating the blueprint for writing an object that describes a point. So int x, int y. What I've done here is that I've now stated that basically that this point object, that this point class has two fields in it. It has an x and a y. Okay. So now if I move over here into the main method of bomb, I can say point p is equal to a new point. Now, Java is nice in that it automatically gives you a lot of things. This is how you build your point object. You say, okay, this is the type. You say it just like you would scanner. Like you'd say scanner KB is equal to new scanner, but you'd say system.in, right? Here, you just fill it with nothing because it just doesn't need any information to create itself. And now we can go and say, so how do we get access to the x and y fields? Well, we say p.x to get its x coordinate. And we can print it out. Will it have anything in it? We didn't really do anything. Let's see. Well, it didn't crash, and it gave us 0. And that kind of makes sense, right? We didn't really define an x coordinate and a y coordinate. We really didn't define what those should be, right? So we didn't give it a value yet. So it makes sense that Java would give it a default value, just like arrays, right? The default value for fields is some kind of value for 0. So how do I give it a value? Well, I can just say p.x is equal to 5. So store 5 in p's x field. So the dot means we're accessing something inside a point. We're accessing something inside the object. So p.x is equal to 5. System out that print line p.x x, so that gives me 5 out, and just to prove it, I'm going to say 5 plus 9, right? So p.x plus 9, so that would be 5 plus 9, which is 14. So we store the value in there, 14, and you can, change it, so I can do 6, p.5, p.x is 5, then 6, and now it's 15. That's pretty cool. So it's just basically a thing that holds an individual x coordinate and an individual y coordinate. So that's really all we needed for it. That was pretty simple and pretty painless, right? And yeah, dealing with fields is that simple. Creating fields is that simple, right? Creating class, public class point, x and y. This just creates a new data type called point, a new type of data. Just like you created a new method, having a class creates a new data type that you can create on your own. And it has two pieces of data. It has an x and a y. It doesn't do anything yet because we haven't defined any behavior. We haven't even told Java how to build it, but it's when you define something, Java wants to be able to build it right away, so it provided a way for us to build it just by saying, new point. So a field, the most important thing to remember about these fields inside of objects is that every object has its own copy. Okay, so let's go ahead and just see that, and I'll come back to this example. So let's call this guy P. Okay, and we've said that his p.x is 6. Okay, system, and let's go ahead and create a second point. Point p2 is equal to new point. And right now we can only do this. We can only feed it nothing. Okay. And let's go ahead and say p2.x is equal to -100. Very distinct value from 6. Okay. So now let's go ahead and print out p.x and p2.x. So we're printing out p's x coordinate and then p2 its x coordinate. So we print out 6 and -100, right? The data stored in here is different than this data stored in here, right? If I were to do px plus p2 plus x, it's 106 because these are two different copies. So, each point has its own x and its own y, right? Every object has its own copy of its field. And the field is basically just part of its state, which is, just how it is right now, right? Its state is that it's, right, for these points, it's that their state is that they're at this x, y coordinate. And to just declare what it is, you just say to declare what fields are, you just simply say this is the type I want, and this is the name of the field. This is the type of the field, this is the name of the field. So, for example, we have the student. If we have this one, create a student object, and we define a student as having names and GPAs, we put down a string name. So each student would have their own name, and each student would have their own GPA. If we wanted to add a third line for their major as a string, so we'd go string name, double GPA, string major. And each student object would have their own name, GPA, and major. And other classes, they can, see those fields and they can modify them. So you can I've already shown you how to do that, right? In this one, we can access them and we can also modify them. Okay, so here we have 2 points here. The x coordinate is p1.x, p2.y is 13. Okay. Big thing to know is notice that I've gone to bomb every time to run it, right? Point.java, it does not have a main method in it. I cannot run it because it does not have a main method. If I did have a main method in it, it would run, and you could put a main method. You're more than welcome to put a main method into it, but it's not considered good practice. Instead, you want to have a second class that runs everything.